section is Kiddush Hashem. Okay. A few years ago, at the conclusion of a periodic meeting with an important client, he asked me to stay for a private discussion. This person is renowned for their honesty and trustworthiness, living up to all commitments and promises. He opened up our session by thanking me for the superb and reliable service we provide his company, and then added a startling statement. It says, "You shattered one of my preconceived notions about observant Jewish businessmen." He continued, "I'm not so familiar with Orthodox Jews since I grew up in a home that was alienated from Judaism. There was one observant Jew with whom I partnered on a deal, believing that because of his strict adherence to faith, he would be very trustworthy. I was very surprised and disappointed to find out that he often didn't stand by his words. I mistakenly concluded that my own personal ethics were not congruent with religious ethics and decided to stop doing business with observant Jews. I was therefore very hesitant to meet with you initially, and finally acquiesced because of my respect for our mutual friend who so vehemently vouched for you. I'm happy we met and gave your company a shot, not just because of your great service and outstanding results, but because it is now clear to me that my own ethical standards are in complete harmony with the Jewish view. I asked for this private meeting so you could explain to me how seemingly observant, God-fearing people can engage in unethical and sometimes outright deceitful behavior." Okay, so just one more thing here. This is just the intro.
Well, what was his answer?
Okay, I could not sense one iota of enmity or cynicism in his question. Initially, I avoided responding. This is to the guy, the non-film guy. I avoided responding and explained that I cannot comment without knowing the specific circumstances. He brushed aside my reticence, and I proceeded to explain that dressing like Orthodox Jew doesn't mean that one is truly God-fearing. I declared that the majority of Orthodox Jews are ethical individuals who are upright and trustworthy, and that it is unfortunate that his initial encounter was with a person whose conduct was inappropriate. Though I was gratified that my response was accepted, I felt ashamed to be associated with one who caused such a terrible Chilul Hashem.
Sure.
It's still a bit, it's quite a long section, so we can continue. Yeah, it's as we've all experienced, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, guys, we're heading to we're halfway through the 88th stuff, and the Mishnah states a deaf, mute, a mentally deranged person and a minor, as well as a woman, by the way, an encounter with them is bad. So why is it bad? Well, very simple. If there's a kid and you get in an altercation with a 10-year-old boy and you're driving a Porsche and he takes a ball peen hammer to your windscreen in your car and does a panel beating job, you can't panel beat his face. You're very likely you can't even extract money from him because he's a minor. However, if you give him a smack, you're going to land up in jail. So there's only a downside to that altercation. Same with a deranged person, a deaf, mute, and a man and a woman. Is the other words why a woman? Well, basically, if she's married, the money isn't hers; it belongs to her husband. So the moral of the story is generally don't start with people where you could have a losing streak. That's for absolute sure. Now, let's talk about an interesting case now. So, what case are we talking about? Is that we're talking about a case where the mother of Rav Shmuel Bar Abba of Hagronia was married to Rav Abba. Well, so what does this actually mean? After she married Rav Abba, she wrote over her Melog property to her son, Rav Shmuel Bar Abba. Now, we're going to explain to you there are three different types of assets that a married woman can have and what she brings in the marriage, etc. So, in other words, this was his second marriage because she had a son that was born from her previous marriage to another man, also named Abba. For some reason, some people like marrying people called Rodney or Colin, and she liked marrying people called Rav Abba. So the bottom line is the second husband had the same name as the first. So, in other words, what happened is on the second marriage, she wanted her son to acquire her possessions during her lifetime so that her present husband, the second Rav Abba, wouldn't inherit them upon her death. Okay? So the mother of Rav Shmuel Bar Abba of Hegronia was married to Rav Abba. This was her second marriage. She wrote over her property to Rav Shmuel Bar Abba, her son. Now, she never got divorced. Her husband deceased. Okay? And after she died, Rav Shmuel Bar Abba went before Rav Yirmiyah Bar Abba for a ruling. Rav Yirmiyah Bar Abba established him in the property as the rightful owner. So, in other words, by law, a husband inherits his wife, as in any case of inheritance. However, this applies only to property that was owned by the deceased at the time of his or her death. Okay, so as long as he lives, he has full right to dispose of his possessions as he pleases, as the husband. So even if this means that his heir to be won't inherit them. So, for example, you've got a husband and wife, and they've got children, and the wife dies and leaves her malok property to the husband. In that particular case, if he blows all the money, the kids won't inherit. That's the bottom line. So where do we find this? In Bava Basra 111b. Okay. So according Rav Yirmiyah Bar Abba ruled that the gift of Rav Shmuel Bar Abba's mother to her son during her lifetime was valid. In other words, when the mother was deceased, there was a legal battle between her current husband, her second husband, and the son of her previously deceased husband. Okay. So what was the reaction? So anyway, the son went to Rav Shmuel Bar Abba. That's the son, and he went before Yirmiyah Bar Abba. I need to go on a course just to know how to pronounce these names, guys. I'm so sorry. So sorry. So what was the husband's reaction? Rav Abba went and related the matter before Rav Ushaya, and he related the matter before Rav Yehuda. So Rav Yehuda said to him, so says Shmuel, a woman who sold malok property during the lifetime of her husband and then died, the husband removes the property from the possession of the purchasers. Rav Abba might therefore prevent Rav Shmuel Bar Abba from taking possession of the property. So what happened is when Rav Yehuda went to Rav Shmuel, he was on the side of the husband and said that he's entitled to keep the asset irrespective of the fact that she left it to the son from the first marriage. Okay, and what
did she leave it? Did she leave it in the will?
Yes, she did. She did.
Okay, because in the when it comes to the laws of inheritance, if you gift it before you die to the son, then there wouldn't have been an issue. Definitely not.
Well, in secular law, in halachic law, it's not that clear.
So even with that, if you give a gift prior to as a gift.
No, there's certain circumstances. There's certain circumstances. One of the circumstances is, the bottom line is, you can't give what's not yours. So one of the arguments that are going to come up is it wasn't hers to give. When she entered into the marriage, there's certain things that she's got as an obligation to her husband, and there's certain obligations the husband has to the wife, irrespective of in terms of inheritance. Do you get what I'm saying? There's certain laws. So, for example, common law supersedes contractual law. Let me give you an example. If Shmuel pays Ahmed below the minimum wage allowed in South Africa, okay, then he can take Shmuel to court based on the fact that even though they had a contractual obligation, it's transgressing common law. Do you get what I'm saying? So the thing
is,
it still falls within that sort of thing. I know it is a very big personal matter.
No, I think it's different, because I think, because of the fact that it's the spouse. So I was just thinking while you were saying that, because your answer was very good. And so I think the difference here is that when it's going to the kids aren't entitled to that except in inheritance. Otherwise, they're not entitled to it. So while she's alive, or while that person's alive, the father or the mother, while they're alive, they can gift it to the. Am I getting mixed up again? Yeah.
A little. Listen, I tell you what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to hear the
take
case.
It offline.
No.
I'll listen to your.
I say let the whole case unfold, and then when the
Yes.
case unfolds, you'll probably have a little bit more clarity. But you're onto the right point. It depends how you hold. Do you hold that the spouse is entitled to give to their child a gifted inheritance, and does it stick? And the bottom line of whether it sticks or not depends on whether it was hers to gift or not. That's the bottom line in the marriage.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I like that comment you made. Thank you. That's
sure. So, in other words, what Shmuel the Moira was saying is a woman who sold malog property during the lifetime of her husband and then died. The husband removes the property from the possession of the purchasers. So what do we mean here? Is that if the buyer attempts to possess the property, the husband may block him. So we learned before that whether you gift something or whether you sell something, it's the same status. You either take money for it, okay, or you gift it. But either way, you transfer possession. That's the bottom line. So Shmuel, the Moira, is basically saying, Gavin, that at the end of the day, it wasn't hers to gift or to sell, because that malog property, during the lifetime of her husband, while he's alive, he can block the gifting or he can block the purchase. That's the bottom line. Why? Because there's such a thing called the capital amount and there's such a thing called the usufruct. So the wife can own a property, but the husband derives benefit. And while there's still benefit accrued towards him in terms of a monthly produce or whatever the case may be, he has a certain amount of control over that asset during his lifetime. And so too, that because he doesn't own the actual essence of it, he can't do certain things without the son either. So it's a very complex relationship. But let me just go through the Gemara, and then it'll give you a bit of a better understanding. So according to Rav Hoshaya that went before Rav Yehuda, who went before the Moira Shmuel, a woman who sold malog property during the lifetime of her husband and then died. The husband removes the property from the possession of purchasers. We can say here, or the person who she gave the property to. In this particular case, she transferred ownership, but it wasn't hers to transfer because the husband was a beneficiary as well. Okay, that's his opinion. Now, Rav Yirmiyah Bar Abba defends his ruling because he went according to the son. That was the opposite opinion. And he said to them, listen, the son's entitled to get that gifting from his mom when she dies. It's an inheritance because the mindset is different. What's the mindset? There's a Mishnah that supports his position. And that should determine the law and not a ruling by the Moira Shmuel. So what he was saying is Rav Yirmiyah Bar Abba assumed that the reason for Shmuel's ruling was that the husband owns the right to the produce, okay, of his wife's malog property, and that this right prevents the wife from giving away that property. Accordingly, Rav Yirmiyah Bar Abba cited a Mishnah to prove that one person's right to the produce of a second person's property does not block the second person from selling or giving away that property. And you're going to see why now. So those are the two different opinions. And he was saying they're Moira, and I don't think he meant it disrespectfully. He just said that basically, if we get a Mishnah from a Tana, and the Moira can't argue with it, Gavin, that's the bottom line. That's what he was saying. That's why I used that term. So what happens is, what's the Mishnah? The Mishnah is from Bava Basra 136a. And what does it basically state? Is that if one writes over his properties, or we can say in this case, her properties to her son, for him to acquire after his or her death, the son cannot sell the properties completely because they are in possession of the father. So what are we saying here? Is the son...
Stepfather.
Well, the father is still... No, I'm reading the Mishnah itself. I'm going to say how it relates here. Just please give me a fraction of a second.
Okay. No, I didn't realize it was the Mishnah straight. Sorry.
Okay. So if one writes
that was a bit
over...
stupid, sorry.
No, it's fine. If one writes over his properties to his son for him to acquire after the father's death, the son cannot sell the properties completely because they are in possession of the father. Now, there is a case in the Mishnah of a literal father and son. And the father cannot sell the properties completely because they are written to the son. So what we are saying is the relationship where there's both parties have got a tie to the property. What do we mean? The son cannot make... Well, firstly, let's just see what the concept is. The father writes in a deed, acquire the property from today and after death, in which case the son acquires the essence of the property immediately. In other words, he actually has the title deed, and the father retains the rights to the produce. So we can call it in insurance terms the usufruct. So when I was working at Sage Life, what would happen is the capital amount could go, for example, to a parent, and the interest could go to the children, because the children weren't responsible. They would blow millions of rand. But they might have overhead and be in their early 20s and need their apartment paid for. So there's the capital amount and there's a usufruct. In the farm, there's the actual title deed to the farm and the produce at which the father retains the right to benefit until his death, as Rashi says. So the expression from today and after death, when used in a title deed, means the son acquires the essence or the title deed now, and only after the father dies, he retains the rights to the produce. But while the father's alive, the father gets to keep the produce. Okay? So the son cannot make a full sale of the land, nor give it away, because the father still has rights to the produce. The son can, however, accomplish what you call a limited sale of the property, and I'll explain what that means, because the son already owns the land itself, right? And he will own its produce after his father's death. That's according to the Rashbam. However, the father can accomplish a limited sale of the property himself. So in other words, guys, the bottom line is a full and immediate sale of both land and produce can only be made with the consent of both father and son. That's the Kiddush. So if the father did sell the properties, they are sold until he dies. What do we mean until he dies? The buyer acquires whatever rights the father had retained in the property. So in other words, what rights did the father have in this particular case? The buyer acquires the rights to the property's produce until the father dies, at which point the produce reverts back to the son. So in other words, he's actually just paying for the right to get the produce. He doesn't own the property. Fine. So if the son sold the properties, the buyer has nothing in those properties until the father dies. So what we are saying is, if you look at it the other way around, the buyer can't take any of the produce while the father is still alive, because the rights of the produce were retained by the father. So what we are saying is we're looking at it from two angles. The son can't sell it and deprive his father of the produce. The father can't sell the essence of the property because it belongs to the son, but he can sell the rights to the produce. So it's a joint partnership of sorts, where it's a limited sale. It's only when one of the parties dies, like the father dies, that the new buyer can inherit both the actual essence of the land, which is the title deed, as well as the produce. Do you get what I'm saying, guys? It's actually pretty straightforward. I've gone through this quite a bit.
It just sounds bizarre that a buyer would buy if he can't touch the produce, unless there's going to be a big spark in the price of land or something in that area, maybe.
Well, let me tell you something. I thought about it, and this was part of the thing that I said to you the other day. I had to read the Gemara. If the father's 92, it's not the end of the world. You might want that property, and that produce might be great. I mean, the bar's like the guy might live to 120. And
Correct.
yeah, but listen, you look at firstly the age and health of the father. So if the father's 92, what happens is you go to the father and say, "How are you doing, Mr. Cohen?" And you give him, "Haven't seen you in a while," and just get his heart jumping a bit, so that you can end up getting benefits of the
In this world. Yes,
yeah,
all
yeah,
your
you-
rewards will come in this world if
give
you do
you
that.
give him a 93rd birthday surprise party where he grabs his ticker, surprise. You come up to him very sedentary and say, "How are you doing?" Just get the heart pumping a little bit. So, Gavin, it's circumstantial. It might be prime land where at the end of the day he wants to turn it into a factory and he doesn't need the produce. And he's quite happy that the old man gets the produce. There are a myriad of circumstances that allow for different
Yeah,
sorts of arrangements. Do you know what I'm saying? And he might get the property super dirt cheap if he's not needing the produce. In the meantime, does that make sense? There might be a myriad of things. Or he might own the produce next door and wish to expand for his own family at a certain point. In other words,
yeah, and like you say, he's 92 years old, and it might be difficult because it's right next door. It makes sense to take it, and in 2-3 years' time, whenever the father dies, then he doubles his farm. That's worth it.
yes, and what happens is a young couple, they buy a farm. They might want to get the special deal of the essence of the property or the title deed that is selling at below market price because they can't use the produce, right? So they're really getting it at a cheap price. But they have young children. Hang on a sec, they've got young children. Now, what's going to happen is by the time the father dies, they don't need the produce. It's just the husband and wife and maybe one or two young children. They've got their own thing. So they want to be able to get a stake in that land cheaply. But if they were paying in the produce as well, they'd have the headache of farming and harvesting. And now they've got the title deed so that when their own children grow up, they can inherit the farm and now get the benefit of the produce by the time the father dies. I've been thinking about these issues. Okay, but let's just cover a little bit of ground. The bottom line is so Rav Himir Bar Abba begins this explanation of how the Mishnah supports his view, because he's on the side of the son, right? So the Mishnah implies in its last case that when the father dies, at least the buyer has acquired the property completely. And this is so even though the son died during the father's lifetime, so that the rights of the produce never actually came in possession of the son. So what we're saying is the categorical nature of the Mishnah's ruling implies that it holds true in either case, both when the father died during the son's lifetime and also when the son died during the father's lifetime. So in either case, the buyer only really acquires a property when the essence of the property, if the son sold the essence of the property, when he dies, when the father dies, he gets the produce and the full property. But if the father dies without the son, he still gets the title deed, but he doesn't get the produce. But it's a game changer when either the father or son dies. That's the bottom line, because it no longer becomes an inheritance. That's exactly it. In other words, if the son ultimately dies before the father, it emerges that the son's ownership of its essence never gave him any practical benefits, Gavin, in the land. In other words, the son owned the title deed for the purpose of eventually obtaining the rights to the produce when his father died. But it turned out the son never lived to actually see those rights. So nevertheless, the ownership of the essence enabled him to sell the property, and when his father's benefits would end. But the bottom line is the father's rights to the produce didn't block the sale. That's the bottom line. In other words, just because you're getting the usufruct, it's not powerful enough to block the sale. Whereas owning the essence of the property is, according to this Mishnah. So that's the argument that Yirmiyah Bar Abba has. Okay, so I just need to give you guys some background information. Because if you have a look, the argument of Yirmiyah Bar Abba is in accordance with Rav Shimon ben Lakish, okay, which is a Tana. So it doesn't matter whether the son died during the lifetime of the father, in which case the produce never came into possession of the son, or whether the father died during the lifetime of the son, in which case the produce came into possession of the son, the buyer has acquired the properties. So let me just repeat that again, because I want to show you the difference between Rav Yochanan's argument and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. So again, Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba goes with Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, okay, and Shmuel the Amoira goes with Rav Yochanan the Tam. Okay, so let me just go with what Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said again. No matter whether the son died during the lifetime of the father, okay, in which case the produce never came into possession of the son because the father was still alive, and the son, if the father died first, the son would inherit the produce. Or it doesn't matter whether the father died during the lifetime of the son. In other words, the son in that case inherited the produce. The buyer has acquired the properties. And we want to know why. And the bottom line is the essence is that it goes according to the title deed. Okay, in the case of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, they call it the essence. But guys, what I mean is, think of it like the title deed. It's the actual ownership. Okay, so the Gemara continues its, and it says, for it was stated regarding the last case of the aforementioned Mishnah, if the son sold the properties during the father's lifetime and the son died during the father's lifetime, Rav Yochanan said that the buyer does not acquire the property upon the father's death, while Reish Lakish, which is Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, says that the buyer acquires the property upon the father's death. So the bottom line is, as far as Rav Shimon ben Lakish is concerned, the major control of the property has to do with the title deed, the essence. And as far as Rabbi Yochanan is concerned, he's saying the major control of the property is who owns the usufruct, the produce. Because according to Rav Yochanan, if you don't have the produce, what do you have? Which is what Gavin mentioned in the beginning. Kind of, what do you have? There might be rare circumstances where somebody would buy a property like that. But in principle, Gavin, you would go according to Rav Yochanan, who says you buy a farm in order to get the produce. If you don't have rights to it, what have you got? So you can see it from both perspectives. Whereas in the case of you wanting the property next door, you would go according to Rav Shimon ben Lakish because the title deed is what's important. According to Rav Yochanan, the produce is important. So let's explain the first view according to the word of the Gemara, not Damon's interpretation. Okay, so Rav Yochanan says that the buyer does not acquire the property. And the ruling is not contradicted by the aforementioned Mishnah as it might appear. Rav Yochanan would say to you that when did the Mishnah teach that if the son sold the properties, the buyer has not acquired anything in those properties until the father dies? Implying that when the father dies, the buyer has acquired the properties when the son did not die during the lifetime of the father. Okay, well, as usually the case. So that the produce came in the possession of the son before he died. Meaning, in that case, it's retroactively revealed that the son's acquisition of the essence gave him rights to the produce as well. Okay, so the sale of the son therefore transferred those rights to the buyer. So it's only when the son can mix the essence of the property as well as the produce that he has the power. Okay, but when the son died during the lifetime of the father, so that the produce never came in possession of the son, when the father eventually also dies, the buyer does not have any rights to it. So we can see that Rav Yochanan holds that ownership of the rights to the produce of a property is tantamount to ownership of the property's essence. In other words, when one holds the title of an article, he holds the essence. And a second person possesses for a limited period of time the right of usufruct. So the question arises as to who is considered for that period of time the article's primary owner with regard to any special laws that pertain to the owner of the property. So on the one hand, the main function of a property, of a farm in particular, is to yield produce, right? But the owner of the right of the usufruct should be deemed the article's primary owner according to Rav Yochanan. On the other hand, the right of the usufruct is only temporary. So the title holder of the owner's essence In other words, the title deed possesses something that when the right of usufruct terminates, in other words, like the father dies, it'll cause the article to revert completely and permanently to the son. So basically, guys, the point militates for considering the title holder as the article's primary owner. So according to Rav Yochanan, he said primary ownership is determined by the right of use, whereas Rav Reish Lakish basically says that it has to do with who owns the title deed. Does that make sense? So,
Yeah.
hence, when the son who owned only the property sold the property, he sold something that was not his. Because the father retained rights to the produce, he was considered, according to Rav Yochanan, the land's primary owner, and that prevented the son from selling it. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain the second view. If we look at, we've got 4.5 minutes, and we need it. Rav Shimon ben Lakish says that the buyer acquires the property upon the father's death. So he maintains that the Mishnah taught that if the son sold the properties, the buyer has nothing in them until the father dies, which implies that when the father dies, the buyer has acquired the property. So it doesn't matter whether the son didn't die during the lifetime of the father, in which case the produce came into possession of the son, or whether the son died during the lifetime of the father, in which case the produce did not come into the possession of the son. In either case, the buyer has acquired the property. So we can see that Reish Lakish holds that ownership of the rights to the produce is not tantamount to ownership of the property's essence. Okay? So in other words, even though the person with rights of usufruct has full rights to the produce, those rights don't interfere with the title holder's ownership of the land. So that's the bottom line. So when the son sold the property, he in fact was selling something that belonged to him. Okay. So in other words, no matter what order he died, according to Reish Lakish, that the title holder, the deed holder, controls the rights of the property, and therefore is selling what's his. It might make a full sale. It's a conditional sale, only upon inheritance of the usufruct or the produce. But according to Rav Yochanan, the son can't sell it with a title deed because the produce or the usufruct is at the end of the day the whole purpose of why you're having the title deed. Okay. Now tomorrow I'm going to explain how this ties in with the wife who died. Did the Melog property go to the new husband, or did the son actually inherit it when she gifted it to him? So that's in essence the debate. Guys, I hope I gave over the share okay.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
Pleasure. All right. We've got no power. Arthur, lovely to see you.
Tomorrow, same time.
So
yeah, because it gives us a chance to go to shul.
Yeah, but Kevin's got some sort of singles evening or
Yeah,
something.
as long as it's like a big, massive festival with like top performers, well-known, famous down the road here. Like,
so what time do you want? What time do you want to do?
Like normal, like a 6:30 SA time. If we could try stick to that.
Okay, it realistically will be 7:40 for one reason, is that Sydenham for some reason seems to finish at 6:30, not 6:15, because the rabbi speaks for 15-20 minutes. So it starts at 5:45 and it only ends at 6:30. It's not Mincha and Maariv back to back. He literally talks, and it takes me 10 minutes to jog home. So 20 to 7 instead of so I'm only going to be 10 minutes later, Kev. That's all.
No, that's fine. No, as long as it doesn't, because otherwise if it starts like you say 7 o'clock, then it's like 8 o'clock here.
It won't be. It'll be.
No, that's okay. If it's 22, that's also okay. What about Arthur?
Yeah.
Is that good for you, Arthur?
Good for you. I just want to ask you a question. Can you take a video of you jogging home? I didn't know you could jog.
It's like running with the kippa and the hand on the kippa and watching and dodging cars. By the way, in South Africa,
the problem is we can't find a videographer to do it because no one's quick enough to keep up with Damon. That's the problem.
Yeah.
By the way, I have a LED light that you have to use, Arthur, when you cross the road, because some taxis don't use their lights and that hit you. At night they drive without the light. I'm not joking. I'm not kidding.
Why would they drive without the light?
because this is Africa, but this
No.
is what happens when the bottom falls out. I'm serious. I'm serious. All right, guys. I think
Surprised